You're listening to Miss Opinionated. Real life, real perspective, and unapologetic truth. I'm your host, Divine Priestess. Let's get into it. Bienvenidos, mi gentes. Alright, this is Miss Opinionated. So if you are watching via video, you're going to see me look back at my computer, the camera, and my piece of paper because I need to try to stay on task. I'm going to try to keep this podcast, this episode, under 15 minutes. We're going to see how I do. Because this episode is just the introduction. It's just to not necessarily tell you what to expect, but it's going to tell you what is going to take place within future episodes. Okay, it's going to tell you what the podcast is essentially about. So that is the whole purpose of this episode. So if you don't want to hear any of that, then go ahead and skip to episode 2. All right. But for those who are staying, welcome. This is Miss Opinionated. This is a space of real thoughts, real perspectives, and ultimately real life. Okay. Miss Opinionated is a space for real conversations and unapologetic perspective. In this podcast, I share my views on real life, cultural differences, spirituality, motivation, and everything in between. From everyday observation to deeper reflections on healing, identity, and personal growth. These episodes are rooted in honesty, curiosity, and lived experiences. So if you hear me talking about something, just know that I've either observed it or I've lived it. And I have lived many lives. So you're not going to hear me talk about something that I haven't been there, done that. Okay. Now this podcast is not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, speaking truth as is experienced, and creating room for dialogue, reflection, and growth. Whether we're talking culture, spiritual journeys, or lessons that life keeps teaching us, I invite you to listen openly, for damn sure think critically, and honor your own perspective along the way. I'm not here to change the way you think. I'm here to open your eyes, broaden your horizons, and share different perspectives on things. Okay? It can't just be one-sided. I know a lot of y'all like to be one-sided because it feeds whatever narrative you have in your head, but that ain't gonna happen here. Okay? Bueno. So, like I already said, we're not chasing perfection. We damn sure ain't pretending that we have it all figured out. And I want you to know that this is not a space about being right. There are two sides to every story, like people say. And so you are going to hear the sides of those you may not normally. And I want you guys to open your ears. As we tell the kids, put on your listening ears. Open your mind. Put on your thinking cap. Because a lot of things are going to feel like it's challenging you. And that's good. Because how else are you going to grow without being challenged? How else are you going to develop? So if some episodes make you feel uncomfortable, I want you to sit with it and I want you to try to examine why. Some episodes are going to feel very reflective. And a lot of them are going to sound like conversations that you did not know that you needed. But everything shared here comes from a place of honesty, curiosity, and self-trust. So if you are someone who thinks deeply, questions often, feels strongly, and isn't afraid of perspective, then welcome. This is Miss Opinionated, and this is episode 1. Again, this episode, we're just going to touch on what Miss Opinionated is about and things that you may see in other episodes. And other things that you may see in episodes are these segments. So there are a total of 5 segments. We have culture check, espiritual reflections, right? Spiritual reflections, real life rants, motivation moments, and the signature segment, opinionated take. Hello, show was called Miss Opinionated. Why would there not be an opinionated take? Okay. So when it comes to cultural check is conversations on cultural differences, social norms, generational patterns, identity, and how culture shapes behaviors, beliefs, and expectations. Dos, right, is spiritual reflections. Grounded spiritual insight without bypassing reality. Reflections on faith, intuition, ancestral wisdom, rituals, emotional healing, and personal alignment. Tres, real life rants. Unfiltered thoughts on everyday situations, frustrations, patterns you keep noticing, or truths people avoid saying out loud. And I want you to know that everything is productive that is done here. So yeah, even though that there is a rant, there is some productivity that is coming out of it. Because if there was not, my great grandmother would be turning her head and putting her nose up in the air to me if it ain't productive. So everything is productive on here. Okay. With a rant, there is going to be a solution. There is going to be a solution. You can either take that solution or not. Again, that is you, that is your life, and that is the experience that you choose to have. Number 4, put on my glasses. Motivation moments. Short segments focused on encouragement, perspective shifts, self belief, and moving through life with intention, even when things feel unclear. And lastly, opinionated take, which is the signature segment where myself and others share a strong, thoughtful take on a topic. No debate, no disclaimers, just perspective. Now, y'all are going to see how Miss Opinionated change over time due to me figuring out the best way to go about these segments. Because I'm real big on if conversation flows, conversation flows. Okay. And so you may not hear separation in the segments for some episodes. Some episodes you may say, all right, it's time for motivation moment. All right. Sometimes you won't, and the motivation is mixed up in the message. So I strongly encourage you to listen, right? Listen. Sometimes you got to go back and listen again so you can really understand. You may catch some things that you have missed. Okay? I will go over in this episode how Miss Opinionated came about. Because, yeah, Miss Opinionated came about because I have opinions. We all have opinions. However, Miss Opinionated came about because over the years, people have continued to ask me if I was bringing my podcast back. For those who do not know, I have had many podcasts over the years. I have changed direction many of times simply because the previous podcasts were focused on one thing. And I am a woman of many talents. I'm a woman who lives many lives. And I don't want to just talk about one thing, right? So the podcast has changed directions over the course of years. The first podcast I started was back in probably 2017, 2018 was probably the first podcast I've started. And that one was all about motivation. It was motivational stuff through and through. Then I came up with Conversations with Divine Priestess, and that one was touching on spirituality. And I've had that name for years, and then I changed it back in 2021. The name for 2021, I believe I did go with Sweetwater Podcast because of Casa de Aguas Dulces, which originally was my tea house, but now Casa de Aguas Dulces is a nonprofit centering focus for the growth and development mentally, spiritually, emotionally within the Black and Brown community. Okay, so check that out. But the podcast was called Sweetwater, and again touched on different things. It did touch on spirituality. I did have guests on there that weren't spiritual, so the conversations would definitely go elsewhere. And trying to keep not only the podcast but myself within a box was extremely difficult, extremely challenging, because Team Sag over here, we don't belong in a box. We don't. And so I left podcasting. And to be quite honest, because yeah, we're gonna be honest, you know, I definitely was so focused on other things because the podcast just wasn't bringing me money. So I wasn't focused on it. I'm like, I got money to go make. I got money to make, and I got other things that I really want to do that can bring me some money, some things that I can go out and have fun, and it just didn't feel like a burden. Regardless if I love talking, it was something that also in my mind, I didn't have everything that I needed, right? I wanted the beautiful setup. I wanted the perfect lighting, all these different things. But and honestly, the people that listened to it did not give two damns about that. Okay. And so after constantly being asked, oh, when you gonna bring the podcast? When you gonna bring the podcast? This, that, and third. I finally decided to bring it back after having a conversation with a friend. Because we were talking about parenting. I've worked with kids since middle school. I mean, yeah, I started babysitting in elementary. In middle school, I had the elective of being with special ed kids, right? With the special ed class. I don't know how I got that elective. No one else had that. It was just me. And so I worked with, them kids. Then I started working in daycares. Um, then years ago, I became a behavior tech, and then I became a registered behavior technician. Right. So we were talking about parenting, talking about the things that I've observed and I've seen. Right. And at the end of our conversation, I sat there and I was like, you know what? I am going to bring my podcast back. And the name hit me like a ton of bricks because I heard clear as day, Miss Opinionated. So I said that to my friend. I said, I'm going to bring it back and I'm going to call it Miss Opinionated. And I laughed because oh, that's such a cute name. It's so catchy. But it's also very true and is reflective of me. That was the biggest thing with having a podcast is I wanted something that reflected me in all the different aspects, right? I know quite a bit of people and I know people in many different walks of life. And I want to showcase that. I want people to have a voice and I want people to share their perspectives, their life, their all these things because I'm all about the growth and the progression of people, right? How there is someone that has experienced something that you have experienced, therefore they can be a great assistant, right? Great guidance, great advisor to you. That there's a lot of cautionary tales, right? So that way you don't repeat what another person has gone through because you can see how it ends, right? You can see where it leads to, for the most part. So that is why Miss Opinionated came about. That's how it was born. Also, with being opinionated, this podcast is about reclaiming that word, especially being a woman of color. So if you have not realized, soy negrita, soy mexicana, right? soy, right? What was the other word? Yeah, yeah. I'm black. I'm Mexican. Okay. Yeah, do I have also indigenous blood? Yeah, because being Mexican, but also I do have other Native American ancestry in me. But being a woman and being a woman of color, being opinionated is something that is typically frowned upon. It is something that is typically shamed because you are typically labeled as someone who is a bitch, someone who is labeled as being difficult to work with, someone who is quote unquote arrogant or egotistical, all these different things, right? In comparison to white men and white women, right? I mean, white women does have their own problems when it comes to being opinionated and, you know, when being compared to men. But nonetheless, it is still different than being a black woman or being a Hispanic woman or Latina woman, right? Indian woman, a Chinese woman, right? Being opinionated is vastly different than our white peers. Okay. And so this is reclaiming it because a lot of times when we have opinions, we are pushed to the side and ignored. And so in history, we saw how if we had concerns, we had to give it to a man, we had to have a man on our side. We had to give it to them so the way they can bring forth the action, right? Whatever ideas that we had that we know were award winning, we had to give it to a man, but then they took credit. So reclaiming this word of being opinionated, it is owning it. Yeah, I'm opinionated. And what? You either want change or you don't, right? And sometimes you have to be 10 toes down. If you're going to be opinionated, be 10 toes down. Do not budge. Because even though that they may make you feel bad about it, trust me, they hear you. And don't let them try to punk you out of your space. Now, there's a difference between being closed minded and being opinionated. I can deal with an opinionated person, but I cannot deal with a closed minded person who also happens to be opinionated. Being opinionated. Let's go look up the full on definition. Let's see. An opinionated person has a strong, firmly held belief and isn't afraid to express them, often dogmatically and without considering other viewpoints, which can be seen as stubborn, biased, or even arrogant. While having strong opinions isn't inherently negative, opinionated usually implies an unwillingness to accept being wrong or to listen to others, sometimes dominating conversations, even when uninformed. I feel like that is dealing with someone that's closed minded. I feel like being opinionated is just expressing a strong belief, and that can bring forth the air of conversation to bring forth understanding. So, yeah, being opinionated has a strong belief, and it does not always mean that that person is right, but this is what I believe. So, now let's examine why I have this belief. Where did that belief come from? Okay. I feel like a closed minded person is not going to want to know where that comes from because they don't care, right? That's their opinion. That's it. We don't want to hear nothing else. I don't want to. So we're going to rechange that, right? Because there's nothing wrong with being opinionated. Being opinionated does not always mean that you are stubborn because, again, you have this belief for a reason. You experience something, you witness something. If you not experience or witness something, then I just feel like you being closed minded and you just being stubborn because you want to be right. Okay. Now, the nuance to being opinionated Sometimes it just means having strong convictions, right? Being assertive, but usually implies an unreasonable um, adherence to beliefs, being dogmatic. See how it says usually it implies being unreasonable. I'm an assertive person. Okay, I'm not unreasonable. I like to look at all the sides of things. So we're gonna read. This is a space of, again, no one on here is being closed-minded, and if they being closed-minded, they're not gonna last long, because then it definitely will turn into a debate. And one thing about it, I'm not gonna debate. I'm not gonna have an argument with nobody. We can discuss, but we not about to argue. That's what we not about to do. Point blank. Period. And that's how I feel on that. All right. How much time have we been on here? Oh, 20 minutes? What did I tell y'all? 30? I'm going to try to keep it under 30? Or did I say I'm going to try to keep it under 20? I think, all right, we're going to let this go for 5 more minutes. We're going to try to hurry up and get through this for 5 more minutes. Okay. Now, again, with Miss Opinionated, I want to push y'all to start thinking. If someone says something on here that you don't like or that you don't agree with, I want you to ask yourself why. Because what I've noticed, a lot of people who don't like what someone says or they don't agree with what someone has said is because they don't have enough information, and it's just easier to disregard that because you don't know. And if that is the case, then I need you to go, again, turn on your listening ears and put your feelings aside and hear what is being said. And then go do your own investigations. Go do your own research. Even if you do agree with something on here, I want you to go deeper. Knowledge is out there, and let's take advantage of that. We have Google, we have libraries. There are so many resources. So there's always more information that can be learned. And again, you have to realize that these episodes, they are not days long. So there's not, all the information is not going to be given in one episode. Okay? If it was that easy, then people wouldn't be going to college for 4+ years to learn a subject. Correct? So just know that there is always more to a topic, always more to a discussion than what is just happening on here. And a lot of times, too, these episodes have taken place off camera. And I sit here, I'm like, oh, I wish I was recording right now. So it's that whole thing of like, a lot of these conversations that's being had on here too were already had. So now there's more information. Things that probably weren't said on camera, right? Things that what I say all that to say, do your research. Whether you agree or disagree with what's on here, I want you guys to go further, do your research and educate yourselves. Okay? If you have the capabilities to do so, then do so. Audiobooks exist. And I know a lot of people are not big fans of YouTube, but there's a lot of good information that is on YouTube. And again, you're supposed to continue to check resources and seek multiple resources. They teach us in English class when you have to write them papers, right? So again, please, I am pushing y'all to think for yourselves. Don't take everything on here as law. Don't take everything on here as law. Please, let's get that brain working. Let's start to think. Let's try to understand. All right. We're gonna cut it off here because I feel like if I go on to the next talking point, we're gonna be here for a while. So we are going to definitely close this out because again, this episode was just about Miss Opinionated, the podcast. and what it's going to bring. And Miss Opinionated is definitely going to bring a shift in perspective. It's going to bring an expansion of the mind. It's going to bring forth that critical thinking back into your life. It's going to bring forth that courage to speak up, to share your opinions, to stand firm in it as well. Now, this podcast is not going to tell you what to think, but it is here to remind you that you are allowed to think for yourself. So if something resonated, I want you to sit with it. If something challenged you, I want you to explore it. And if you didn't agree with what was said on here, that's okay too. But I also want you to try to understand why you didn't agree. I want you to, because a lot of times people don't agree with certain things because it requires them to take accountability for something, right? Unless it's just like complete mierda, then that's, yeah. But I want you to explore, okay?